you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Alger. I'm the president here at the Massachusetts Historical Society, and I am so pleased to have you here in our building at 1154 Boylston Street, but also welcoming all the over 200 folks online for the official launch of Wheatley at 250, Black Women Poets Reimagine the Verse of Phillis Wheatley Peters. We are so excited to host this program because it connects both of our mission and our collection. And to say something, too, about the mission, sort of extra reason I'm very excited to have you in the house here, is that, part of what we're doing is public history. We want to be a resource to the many publics that make up our community. And we want to find out the ways that people need to understand or to know about history. And I just think one of the avenues that historians haven't explored as fully as they should and we will, is the role of art, where knowledge and historical knowledge can enter in a way that touches the emotions, that has a deep psychological resonance. So again, I'm just excited to have, as I said to somebody earlier, art on the premises. At the MHS, we are very committed to that mission and to bringing people together for interesting, thought-provoking programs. And we have a variety of ones, and we're always looking for programs that address the complexities of history and encourage people to share their observations, interpretations, and ideas. So what's going to happen is we're going to have about 45 minutes or so of presentations, and then we're going to open it up so we get your ideas and observations. But I have to say that we're only able to do this because of the support provided by friends like you. So this evening, I am honored to welcome editors Danielle, Legros, George, and Artress, Bethany White, and contributors Florence Ladd and Janice Lowe, with a special appearance by Robert Bellinger. So Danielle Legros George is a professor emeritus of creative writing in the Lesley University MFA program in creative writing and taught in the Joyner Institute for the Study of War and Social Consequences Writers' Workshop at the University of Massachusetts at Boston for more than a decade. Artress Bethany White is Associate Professor of English at East Stroudsburg University and teaches poetry and nonfiction workshops for Rosemont College Summer Writers Retreat in Pennsylvania. Florence Ladd is a fiction writer, social critic, and psychologist. She has taught at several area institutions, including Simmons, Harvard's Graduate School of Education and Graduate School of Design, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Wellesley. Janice Lowe is a composer, poet, and multi-instrumentalist. Her poems have been published in numerous journals, and she will be accompanied by Robert Bellinger. So I invite you to sit back, enjoy the conversation, as we all consider Phillis Wheatley Peters' impact and share selections from their new book. So welcome. We're so pleased to have you.
I'd like to thank Olivia Saya, Carol Knopf, and Sarah Georgina for making this evening happen. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of the editors at Pangyris, our publishers, Amanda Lewis, Greg Harris, Cheryl Clark Vermeulen, Cynthia Barger, and our amazing copy editor on this project, Rob Dobson, in the corner over here. I'm Danielle, Legros George. Good evening. It's just a great pleasure to be here with you and with my colleagues this evening. Artress and I will provide introductory and contextual remarks on Wheatley and the Anthology before we hear from contributors Florence Ladd and Janice Lowe. And if we have time, Artress and I, who are also contributors, might share a few words on our own contributions. So I'll begin with an introduction to Phillis Wheatley Peters. And some of you already know that she published a book in 1773 in London entitled Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. And she's been called and is many things, including the girl kidnapped from her home in West Africa, later enslaved by Boston's Wheatley family in 1761, not far from here in Beacon Hill, and the acclaimed 18th century transcontinental poet. the 20th century poet June Jordan in a fantastic essay published in 2006 entitled "The Difficult Miracle of Black Poetry in America," names Wheatley, quote, the first decidedly American poet on this continent, black or white, male or female. By virtue of the keen attention Wheatley paid to the turbulent events of her time and the revolutionaries who would forge America, or the United States. And as you know, in 1773, we were not yet the United States, and Wheatley was witnessing and documenting the emergence of this country. Henry Louis Gates, the historian, situates Wheatley squarely in the colonial and post-colonial debates that sought to confirm or dismiss black intelligence. As a consequence of her distinction as a poet, Wheatley was thrust into a cosmopolitan sphere and found herself in conversation with such figures as George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. So here she was a young woman, a teenager, in correspondence with these dudes. She was also in conversation posthumously with Thomas Jefferson, whose 1785 book, Notes on the State of Virginia, prefers scathing and undeserved criticism. For Jefferson to have recognized the intelligence and the talent of Wheatley would have been to recognize the intelligence and the talents of those he had enslaved and benefited greatly from, whose labor he benefited greatly from. In spite of his animus, Wheatley had endorsers, or blurbers, to use a current term, who identified themselves as among the most respectable characters in Boston. And these included the governor and the lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Of her poems, they remarked, "She's been examined by some of the best judges and is thought qualified to write them." This because there had been questions about whether she had indeed written the remarkable poems that she had indeed written. There's been some really wonderful scholarly attention paid to Wheatley's work, including Honoré Fanon Jeffers' collection of poems, The Age of Phillis, published in 2020. And Jeffers advances the argument for referring to Wheatley by her married name, Phillis Wheatley Peters. At the time of Wheatley's death, she was still wedded to John Peters, and this important historical detail liberates Wheatley Peters from perpetual historical adolescence. Right? So we can now separate the celebrated but enslaved teenage poet from the free and married author. Tara Bynum, a scholar of literary histories, in a fantastic book, Reading Pleasures, Everyday Black Living in Early America, deepens our understanding of Wheatley's inner life by identifying her letters, not her poems, as a means by which Wheatley delights, quote, delights in the pleasures of her living in spite of and because of the world at large. She had a long epistolary relationship with a woman named Obor Tanner, another enslaved African woman who lived in Newport, Rhode Island. Phillis Wheatley Peters called herself an Ethiop and an African, a poet, and she dubbed herself friend to, among others, Obor Tanner, to Scipio Moorhead, a young African-American painter who made the image that we're familiar with, Samson Okum, a Mohegan Presbyterian evangelist, and Selena Hastings, an Englishwoman, Countess of Huntingdon, who was instrumental in funding the publication of Wheatley's book. Wheatley saw her verse published in London, in Boston, on two sides of the Atlantic. She named herself wife to John Peters, whom she married in 1778, and mother of their children. She was an acclaimed writer, as you know, political actor in her lifetime. Yet she wouldn't live to see herself as inspiration for an immense number of scholarly, literary, and creative texts like ours. she would not see the Boston plaque recognizing the site where she was purchased. It's even hard to say purchased, right? Where she was purchased in now Chinatown, right? Nor her likeness in the form of a bronze statue on the city's Commonwealth Avenue Mall. She wouldn't see the buildings and lecture halls named for her hundreds of years after her unexpected death in 1784, while she was still in her early 30s. And a second manuscript known to have been circulating at the time of her death has never been recovered, nor the exact site of her grave in Boston's North End been identified. So she was named after the ship that bore her into the maw of attempted dehumanization that was slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. We will never know her West African name, her true name, the name given to her by her parents, but many call her and claim her as sister, as ancestor. Many name her the mother of African American literature and a luminary of United States letters.
And I'm going to share some comments about our process as editors for this volume. I'm going to start with a short anecdote. When my daughter was 8 years old, she saw me working at my computer on a Phillis Wheatley commemorative post for Black History Month. Looking intently at Wheatley's picture, she asked who she was. I told her that she was Phillis Wheatley, the first Black poet to publish a collection of poems in America, and that she had come to the country on a slave ship when she was her age, 7 or 8. She looked at me in the face as if that moment in history was suddenly in the present and said, "She must have been so scared." That emotional connection to the Middle Passage journey and rise to fame of poet Phillis Wheatley is one that Danielle and I assumed and hoped all of our contributors experienced upon first hearing the story of Phillis Wheatley Peters. And it is also what we hoped would prompt them to say yes to participating in our proposed anthology project, Wheatley at 250, Black Women Poets Reimagine the Verse of Phillis Wheatley Peters. Our major concern when we began to compose the letter of invitation to a list of stellar Black women poets was whether the poets loved Phillis Wheatley, and perhaps even Danielle and I, enough to turn around an original, reinscribed Wheatley poem within 6 months. For those who don't know, poets can work on a single poem for years in an effort to get it right. So, imagining a best case scenario is what we were working with. We sent our letters of invitation, and when the first yes came down the pike, we were thrilled. And we certainly saw it as an omen of even more affirmations to come. Sure enough, over the course of the next few weeks, the acceptances started pouring in, and we knew the anthology was on its way to becoming a reality. Our next hurdle was assigning poems to specific poets and searching Wheatley's work for connections to who should receive which poem. Part of the challenge involved in this part of the process was the fact that many of Wheatley's poems in the collection Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, published in 1773, were, well, elegies. That said, we did our best to look for some kind of connection between poet and poem. Some of the connections were fairly straightforward. Poet Sharon Strange once attended Harvard, so there was a logical pairing of said poet and the Wheatley poem to the University of Cambridge in New England. From there, our pairing work became a little more interesting, but the true blessing came in the diversity of approaches the poets ended up exhibiting when they submitted their final poems. I believe Tsitsi Jaji's reinscription of Wheatley's To a Gentleman on his voyage to Great Britain for the recovery of his health was one of the early submissions to come in. When we saw her creative use of white space on the page, we knew that we truly were going to get a wealth of approaches to the project. And we paused to celebrate taking the tremendous step of faith necessary for launching such a worthy project on behalf of a dearly beloved literary ancestor. Thank you.
Poem I reinscribed is called On Messrs. Husey and Coffin. It was the first poem published by Phillis Wheatley. It was submitted to a newspaper, the Newport Mercury, and published in December 1767. She was 14 years old. It's said that she heard about an incident that had occurred as she was serving the table at the Boston home of the Wheatleys, an incident that had put at risk the lives of two men from Nantucket, Husey and Coffin, who were sailing to Boston. And having heard about what happened, she, with enormous compassion and empathy, wrote a poem that was somehow sent to the newspaper and published. I'm going to read her poem, and then I'm going to tell you how I came into my reinscription. On Messrs. Husey and Coffin. Did fear and danger so perplex your mind as made you fearful of the whistling wind? Was it not Boreas knit his angry brow against you? And did consideration bow to lend you aid? Did not his winds combine to stop your passage with a churlish line? Did haughty Aeolus with contempt look down with aspect windy and a studied frown? Regard them not. The great supreme, the wise, intends for something hidden from our eyes. Suppose the groundless gulf had snatched away Husey and Coffin to the raging sea. Where'd they go? Where would be their abode? With the supreme and independent God, or made their beds down in the shades below, where neither pleasure nor content can flow? To heaven their souls with eager raptures soar, enjoy the bliss of him they would adore. Had the soft gliding streams of grace been near, some favorite hope their fainting hearts to cheer? Doubtless, the fear of danger far had fled. No more repeated victory crowned their heads. On first reading this poem, getting acquainted with it, I realized that her references to classical deities was just extraordinary, and it took me into a review of classical literature. And then it was the reference to the gods of wind, and her treatment, her use of them in the poem literally blew me away. I was then drawn to meteorological accounts of wind and weather and storms on the Cape, and spent maybe too much time looking into that. And then I looked more closely at her poem and the many questions for and about Husey and Coffin in her poem, and that's what I drew on. And her poem also reminded me of the joy of rhyming, and allowed me to renew my interest, my affection for rhyming. And so then finally came the poem, a short poem, half the length of her poem, a modified sonnet on Messrs. Husey and Coffin. Hearing of your brush with death at sea, young Phillis rushed to pen her wonderment. How you endured tormenting winds, pelagic waters buffeting your catch. Did you read the script in obsidian clouds, trembling? Did you curse mythic wind deities, or pray to the great supreme that you, Husey and Coffin, spared briny graves, be guided over the waves to Boston Harbor, where hopeful and heartfelt relief awaited? Did you thank heaven, promising never again would you repeat risking your lives at sea?
Thank you. I'll start with the poem, A Hymn to the Evening by Phillis Wheatley. Soon as the sun forsook the eastern main, the pealing thunder shook the heavenly plain. Majestic grandeur from the zephyr's wing exhales the incense of the blooming spring. Soft pearl, the streams, the birds renew their notes. and through the air their mingled music floats. Through all the heaven, I'm sorry, I can't see very well. Through all the heavens, what beauteous dyes are spread. But the West glories in the deepest red. So may our breasts with every virtue glow, the living temples of our gods below, filled with the praise of him who gives the light and draws the sable curtain of the night. Let placid slumbers soothe each weary mind, at morn to wake more heavenly, more refined. So shall the labors of the day begin, more pure, more guarded from the snares of sin. Night's leaden scepter seals my drowsy eyes. Then cease my song till fair aurora rise. With our musicality in mind, I interact with Wheatley's poem, A Hymn to the Evening, by remixing her words and their insides, letter, vowel, syllable, diphthong, as hummed tones, as shiny, reverberating bits of percussion, hailing the red-orange sky movement of late day. I've crafted every other line with variations of font, size, and style to riff on the exuberant musicality of her imagery, also adding interstitial lines made up of word fragments from those lines to be sung or chanted. Now a performance text loosely inspired by the rhythms of Sabar drumming from Senegambia, a gathering, a dance, a happening. I'd like to introduce Robert Bellinger, his Sifo, playing Sabar tonight. Evening the hymn to Sabar drumming, an impression, a celebration. Abandoned ink soon. Oh no, 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 no. Sky thunders iron. And then paper grandeur peels. And then essence flores lettering. Rivulet drumming. Windy fife refrain. Bird warbling church. Sabar song, let the north. Orange, glorious, us. Hemp, humming, God's atmosphere, here, shadow of captured epidermis, ruby evening souls, and refresh, work, promise, steal, little, stolen, repose, trunks, tap it, ink, tapped. Thank you, Robert Bellinger.
Wow. That was so beautiful. We have a little time, so I'll talk I'll share my poem. And then Artress will share hers. I reinscribed or translated Wheatley's On Being Brought from Africa to America. It's among her most famous. And I will just read the Wheatley text and followed by my own text, and just say very briefly that I felt that there were two audiences being addressed in the poem. Her fellow and sister enslaved folks and a white Christian audience. On being brought from Africa to America. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I, redemption, neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train. Phillis Wheatley. And here is my remix. On being brought from Africa to America, a reinscription. It was mercy indeed who carried me from what was deemed my pagan land. Mercy, you showed my soul to me, taught me to understand that God exists, that something greater exists too. Now, mercy, who knew what you and I knew? Some say and see the dark as dead, as colored by a knot and dread. I say, I name us fully, Cain, daughters exiled, sons of rain. In us the flood, the moon and tides, horizons, uncut shores and lines, and more, the rays and versed libations to the waiting sun. Thanks.
I'm going to start by reading the first stanza of Phillis Wheatley's poem, To the Right Honorable William, Earl of Dartmouth, His Majesty's Principal Secretary of State for North America, etc. Hail, happy day, when smiling like the morn, fair freedom rose New England to adorn. The northern clime beneath her genial ray, Dartmouth congratulates thy blissful sway. Elate with hope her race no longer mourns, each soul expands, each grateful bosom burns, while in thine hand with pleasure we behold the silken reins and freedom's charms unfold. Long lost to realms beneath the northern skies, she shines supreme while hated faction dies. Soon as appeared the goddess long desired, sick at the view she languished and expired. Thus from the splendors of the morning light, The owl in sadness seeks the caves of night. And I'll read my reinscription. To the Right Honorable William, Earl of Dartmouth, His Majesty's Principal Secretary of State for North America, etc., a reinscription. Imagine freedom embraces a new day, ending threats of war on tense New England shores, all thanks to Dartmouth changing the course of history and bending the king's ear to help him see that America is indeed free and not a new land for white and Black slavery. Imagine I know all about slavery, recall the loose-limbed strut of the once free, before being torn with a please help from parents at dawn, and set on a ship's course, whisking this Black girl far from Afrique's shores, to pen poems for freedom from Britain Day. Is it resentment you think you hear so free in my verse, brimming with coupled pleas to help you remember me? Afrique, short of course for Black sorrow on American shores, the endless wait for Emancipation Day to firmly cast off manacled slavery. Great men crave fame, but few extend help to humans in pain. Freedom, their right, of course, but we all covet liberty on near and far shores. Even you, Dartmouth, will stand one day beneath God's sternest glare, hopeful and free, or bedeviled for endorsing slavery.
And answers, and if everyone would just...
In your reimaginings and translations, remixes of this work, as you were talking about, can you talk a little bit about the line integrity and enjambment and the differences between the works there?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. There were 20 contributors to the anthology, and so each poet brought her own sensibility, her own understanding of the original work, and then her own strategy for translating the text. So there were 20 different kinds of approaches to the text. Some people... of course, there was enjambment in some of the works. Some people, discussed in their essays in the anthology, which you should get a copy of. Some people discussed trying to find a best way to enter the text. Right? Some people found Wheatley inscrutable. Found her cool. Right, but she was constrained to a certain degree, right, by her position, certainly within the Wheatley family. Right? She was an enslaved woman, a brilliant woman, so negotiating enslavement and a desire to express as freely as possible what she needed to. So some people were negotiating how to get close to that kind of Wheatley and what that would mean for the poem. We had one contributor who we asked to write an elegy who kind of got a little pissed off, not at us certainly, but about having to console a woman who had much more privilege, right, than Wheatley had. And so she writes about that, and is able to write one of the most remarkable poems, we feel, in the anthology. So very different approaches. Some people took literal approaches. Some people were a bit more free in their approaches. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Artress, would you like to? No, I think you did. Okay.
Thank you. First, I really appreciate hearing people who know how to read poetry, since I read poetry like I read the Wall Street Journal, which doesn't help. But my question is more of a historical nature. You had mentioned that Wheatley had gotten certain information from serving at the dinner table, and somebody had told me that she wrote a poem. I mean, eventually she knew Washington and Franklin, but she didn't start out that way. And somebody told me that she had written a poem in the beginning that specifically was directed towards an English nobleman. It was an elegy, basically to get her name out there. And of course, that's where she ended up, having her book first published. So, and this is what somebody else has told me. It may not be 100% true, but do you have any idea how? I mean, she obviously got a huge amount of information to be able to figure this out. And do you have any idea whether these were things she overheard at dinner? I also know that obviously somebody taught her how to read and write in the Wheatley household. So I'm just kind of curious about her personal background, because she obviously put together incredibly complex ideas, but she had to get the information also from her surroundings.
Okay, so she was obviously taught how to read and write, and she evidenced a high level of intellect after gaining these skills. So she was very adept at deconstructing complex ideas, and included in that was her own situation. The poem to the Earl of Dartmouth that I just read is one of my favorites because it deals with Black liberation politics. So the fact that she could include that politic, and it was one of the poems included in the collection, shows that there was a lot of respect for her desire to express her own views on why she should be free. She talks about being torn from her mother and father in Africa. So of course she understands freedom because of that loss. So how dare people around her talk about desiring their own freedom from colonial rule without including Black people in the mix? So that level of sophistication shows that indeed she was listening, but she was thinking and figuring out her own desire for a shift in her subject position at the same time. So.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. We forget that she arrived at about age 7, and we know this because she was missing her 2 front teeth, which is the time. Age 7 is about 6, 7, 8, I guess, the times that kids lose their front teeth. So she didn't come, tabula rasa, she didn't come a blank slate, right? She'd had a family, she'd had early education in West Africa. We believe she's from the Senegambia region. And there's a story of her scribbling on the walls in the Wheatley house in an attempt to communicate with her captors, I guess. So she had already had an education, possibly other languages, right? And bringing this into her experience. And in addition, she received a very, very fine education at the Wheatleys, and so was a critical thinker, all right? She learned Latin and Greek. She was reading the classics. She was reading the noted 18th century British poets, Alexander Pope, Thomas Gray. She was a really smart person. So this notion that this notion of a person who perhaps was less intellectually didn't have a great deal of intellectual agency, I think ought to be questioned. Yeah.
I have a question online from Sarah, who asks, What have you gained from reading each other's texts and their varying engagements with Wheatley's works?
I think what keeps happening is that wonderful thing that happens with art and sharing it. And in this case, it's over centuries. And I really love the focus of this book, of writers engaging with Phillis in many different ways, and also with each other because of this anthology that's been created. It's something to keep coming back to. It's something that continues to grow in, oh, let me go back to this page. Let me go back to this poet. Let me go back to Phillis. Let me just keep going back and forth so that it feels that witnessing that Phillis did of her total environment from before she was captured and brought here, that observant Phillis connects to all of us who reinscribed and remixed. And so I look at the poems, the reinscriptions, the remixes, with the sheer love of language and art and witnessing and making stuff and the play. We were all playing with Phillis. We were all playing with the eras of Phillis, the eras of ourselves, the eras of our ancestors. So that's what I get from it. It's just a constantly renewing love of art and art of love.
I gained enormous respect and admiration for her intelligence and her ability to observe and to translate, if you will, everyday events into poetic form. And personally, I gained a lot of humility.
I was surprised at the various ways people interpreted Wheatley. There were many great surprises. There were surprises on the level of form. There were surprises on the level of language. One of our contributors, Pamela Mordecai, a noted Jamaican poet and educator and novelist and playwright, sent us a poem in Jamaican patois. And when Artress and I received it, the tops of our heads just nearly came off because it was just so wonderful. And for me, Mordecai's reinscription in Jamaican, right, reminded us of Wheatley's place in the Atlantic world, not only in the United States, but in that broader space, and the connection of the Americas to Europe and to Africa and our interconnections. And if we have a little time, I'll just read to you a little bit of Mordecai's poem because it was so delightful. Or I'll read to you 2 stanzas of Wheatley's and then 2 stanzas of Mordecai's. Okay. She reinterpreted An Hymn to the Morning. This is Wheatley. Attend my lays, ye ever-honored 9. She's referring to the muses. Right? Assist my labors and my strains refine. In smoothest numbers pour the notes along, for bright Aurora now demands my song. Aurora, hail, and all the 1,000 dyes which deck thy progress through the vaulted skies. The morn awakes and wide extends her rays. On every leaf the gentle zephyr plays. Harmonious lays the feathered race resume. Dart the bright eye and shake the painted plume. So Wheatley refers to the muses, the daughters of Mnemosyne and Zeus in Greek mythology, who go around inspiring us all, everybody. That's a lot of work. And Aurora, morning. So here is Pam Mordecai's, two stanzas of Pam Mordecai's chorus for Clean Day. And please know that I am not a native Jamaican patois speaker. O nine high sistren, listen to me croonin'. Help me bear me burden and fine tune me tunin'. Roll out the notes cool, melismatic scatty, like how bright they clean need a song from me. Big up, O morning, praise the Tucson tint that pretty up high heaven as you sprint across. Day wake and spread him beam them wide. Soft breeze take every leaf on a joy ride. Pam Mordecai.
Here you go, right behind you.
Lowe, I thank you very much for the project you and have done so successfully. As a non-poet, I will ask a more general question. She grew up in the colonies at a time in which there was a great deal of talk, particularly in Boston, about the colonies being enslaved by the United Kingdom. And in the United Kingdom, a year before she went there, the court in the Somerset case said that a slave who comes to England can stay. They don't have to go back to the colonies. So the question comes up, her poems are question a lot about freedom and liberty. And as I always ask with Sally Hemings, why did Phillis Wheatley decide to come back as a slave rather than staying where she could have been free?
It is a great and difficult question. We have a friend in the room, Debbie Weiss, who wrote a play envisioning the meeting between Wheatley and Franklin in London, and in which this question comes up and is discussed. How would Wheatley live, right, if she stayed in London? She had friends in high places, but would she find work? Where were her people? She had a community in Boston, a community of friends. She was as problematic as it was, of the Wheatley family. Right? Had been greatly assisted by Susanna Wheatley in receiving certainly a colonial education. And I would argue she saw Susanna Wheatley as a sort of mother. I don't say as a mother, as a sort of mother. So there are all of these questions. It's a great question, and it's a vexed one. You know, I don't know if my colleagues would like to add. Mark has
First, First of all, I want to thank the editors especially for a wonderful, powerful, brilliant project. When I first heard on the radio, I think an inaugural presentation of the book, it just really stunned me that this idea of being literally in dialogue with her. And I think we often look at people in the past, sort of look at them, and I'm wondering how this project came to be, of talking with her and imagining this kind of poetic dialogue and inheritance in the most lively way.
One of the things that I forgot about, Danielle, as we were working on this, is all of the time in the beginning when you expressed the desire to do a commemorative project, and we actually looked at what would be the nuts and bolts of composition. That the poems by themselves would not be enough because people would be curious about the process. So we needed those statements to accompany the reinscriptions so that would invite the readership, right, into this process. And so that was really amazing. Down to the ordering of what work would come first. Should it be the Wheatley poem, then the reinscription? Yeah. And we thought about the fact that the whole point of this was to open up the readership for Wheatley's work. And so perhaps we should start with the reinscription. But then we said no, because the process and how some of these authors are thinking about Wheatley herself, that's really important. That's in the moment now. And so that's when we decided to put the prose first. So much of this was about taking that original idea that you came, to me with, and looking at how we can actually construct it to make it viable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one small thing I'll add is we thought about covers, like musical covers, like how Sinead O'Connor made Nothing Compares to You her own. Who knows who wrote that song? Prince wrote it, but Sinead O'Connor blew it up, right? So we were really interested in blowing up in the most magnificent, fruitful ways the poems of Phillis Wheatley. We know something about her biography, but how many of us can quote a line, a couplet, a stanza of hers? So we were really interested in going down into the text and then bringing them back out, back up or into the 21st century. So that idea of cover as an act of dedication very much inspired us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the folks online. Thank you for coming in. And have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you.